Welcome to episode 12 of Stir Crazy, the unfiltered, unscripted version of us here at The Real News. We keep it all the way live, baby. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Coming up this show, got a lot to talk about, including the big story of the day because, yep, it happened. Bernie endorsed Biden. We have feelings we will discuss. Also, in the UK, was Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn's campaign for Prime Minister sabotaged from within? Where have we heard that story before? We're going to get into that. Plus, nearly 1 in 3 Americans believe in a conspiracy theory regarding the origins of the coronavirus. Now, I don't have a theory about where it started, but I got a theory about why it's affecting, who it's affecting, at least here in the US. We're going to talk about that as well. And listen, we want to hear your comments, your feedback, your theories. You can just drop it right there in the comments section. We love our audience. You guys have been all the way live. Y'all are real as shit. So just keep coming with what you're coming with, all right? And now it's time to bring in our esteemed panel. We are joined today with Steve Horn. Steve, he writes The Real News' weekly climate roundup. He's joining us today from San Diego. Also joining us is Jacqueline Luqman. She is a host and producer here at The Real News. She's also co-host of the radio show By Any Means Necessary. It's on Sputnik Radio. She's on today from Southeast DC. And Steve Hudson. Yes, we have 2 Steves, not just one, but 2 Steve H's, no less. Hudson's on the line from Cologne, Germany. He is a momentum activist within the British Labour Party. He lives in Germany. He's also host of the Hautzine.fm podcast from the German edition of Jacobin magazine. So welcome all. Thank you all so much for joining us on Stir Crazy.
All right. Thanks.
Going pretty crazy today.
Listen, up is down, left is right, day is night. And Joe Biden has now received the endorsement of Senator Bernie Sanders after Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign last week. He has come on board. Let's hear from Senator Sanders.
So today I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe, and I'm speaking just for myself now, is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
You know, guys, our editor, Lisa Snowden McCrae, she posted a tweet last week that got a lot of attention. She said, so which rapist are you voting for this November? Not that this was a surprise to anyone, but it still, I think, garners hurt feelings. Jackie, what are your thoughts about Senator Sanders' inevitable announcement?
Okay, first of all, can I say, how long do you think it took Joe Biden to practice that fake surprise? I mean, because
shocked.
Because when Sanders said, "I'm endorsing you for," Joe was like, "Oh," like all that was missing was the clutching of his chest. Oh, I'm so touched, man. Look, people are, like, oh, who didn't know this was coming? How could anybody be surprised? There are lots of Sanders supporters who, when Sanders suspended his campaign last week, were saying crazy stuff like, oh, Bernie's going to work in the background to move Biden to the left. And this is a strategy that Bernie is employing to, there was no 3D, 4D, 5D chess in this. We told you after 2016, the Luqmans did, Luqman Nation, we told y'all, Bernie Sanders does not have it in him to fight for the candidacy against the Democratic Party. He doesn't. I think his whole goal was to change the discourse, maybe. But this was never about, from my perspective, Bernie Sanders actually becoming president. It was about introducing new ideas. And that would be fine if the Democratic Party was a party that would actually embrace new ideas. But they're not. The Democratic Party is where new ideas that are not third way centrist Republican light, moderate, pretty much useless policies to people go to die. So, not telling anybody how to vote. You vote for who you want. I'm just saying, told you so.
Yes, Steve Horn. I mean, this is a bit of an all hands on deck situation. The Democrats are trying to coalesce everyone around this wildly unpopular candidate in Joe Biden. And Bernie has been accused of not being a team player in the past. Earlier in the campaign season, in the primary season, Hillary Clinton came out and said that Bernie never stuck for her, which was false. So I feel like Bernie is having to reprove himself over and over again as, no, I am a team player in this.
Yeah, well, first of all, the results from Wisconsin haven't even come in. So I found that just to be a little bit like, why did you put your people through running in Wisconsin? Why did you put them through potentially getting very sick and going to the polls last Tuesday? And then you're not even going to wait until the results come out last week to say that I'm done. And now this week you're endorsing Biden. We still don't know even what the results are of Wisconsin. And then also we don't even know how many people really got sick or potentially may die for doing what they did in Wisconsin last week. So just from a moral reason alone, it just seems shocking that he moved so quickly after this unprecedented event last week, Tuesday, in Wisconsin to do what he did. With that said, I think that what will be interesting is, will his slogan prove true? That is, not me, us. So he's doing what he's doing. What will the us do? What will the quote unquote Bernie movement do? The various tentacles of it. Are they going to go along and do these early endorsements from Biden? Are they going to try to move forward and force concessions before they do so? Obviously, getting Bernie's name behind him in this way is extremely influential for Biden in some ways, but potentially not as much so if the tentacles of what's called the Bernie movement don't go alongside with it. For example, the Democratic Socialists of America, which was one of the key units of the Bernie movement, if you will, among many, they have not proceeded with an endorsement yet. And the Sunrise Movement in Baltimore, for example, where the Real News is based, which is a key prong of the climate movement, of the youth climate movement, they have decided not to endorse and just focus on down ballot stuff. So I think it remains to be seen what the grassroots of this movement does. But that said, I completely agree with everything that Jacqueline said. The thing I wonder about Bernie was, it seems like he didn't have the will to run to win either in 2016 and 2020 in terms of really putting up a fight against Hillary or Biden. What I wonder if that was a personal weakness of his, or if even further, like what Jacqueline said, if that was his sort of he was just trying to put the discourse out there, just trying to get these ideas out there, and didn't have like the full throttle ambition to actually get to the White House. I guess we'll see in the months and weeks and years ahead. But
Yeah, on Twitter for sure, there were some members of Bernie's communication staff who expressed disdain at the fact that Bernie did not go for the jugular to really go at Joe Biden. And Bernie has described having a friendly personal relationship with Joe Biden. So I guess he didn't want to throw his homie under the bus. But Steve Hudson, you're in Germany, you're a Brit. What are your observations? I'm always curious what America looks like from the outside, because it is crazy as shit on the inside. What does it look like from the outside?
I mean, it's, you get these people who like transcribe what Trump says, and these words are on the paper and they don't make any sense. And then you do the same with Biden. And it's hard to imagine that they could have found a worse candidate. And on top of it, it's like the whole thing of like, okay, you're against Trump, but like, what about all the guys who created the social and economic and political alienation that led to Trump being elected in the first place? And, Biden was there. He was involved in all the bankruptcy bills, all these things. And I feel ashamed really to tell you that, but it just seems extraordinary. If aliens are looking from above, there's this sort of liberal idea that Trump is the great break with previous presidencies and whatever. And okay, he's narcissistic liar. And the only difference with Trump is it's just really obvious with him. But the lying in power is a continual fact. And if anything, it's possible that the racist imperialist wars of mass destruction, invasion, possibly slightly ticking down under Trump. Now, I wouldn't vote for Trump in a million years, but really, is Biden going to be better? And who's he going to invade? What's going to happen? It's from this perspective, it's hard to understand why Bernie at least didn't want to extract more in return, more political concessions.
Oh, you raise an excellent point. I like to have Jackie and Horn hop in on that point as well, because what are the concessions? What did Bernie get Joe Biden to agree to in relation to platform or policies? Also in terms of staffing, does Biden have any intentions of integrating any Bernie people into his campaign and then later on into his administration? But I also want you guys to talk about how much of the Democratic establishment really conspired against Bernie Sanders. There was a story, I think, Steve Horn, you probably read this, and maybe Jackie read this too, where it said that Barack Obama not only convinced Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, among others, after they dropped out, to endorse Joe Biden, to really make the road that much tougher for Bernie Sanders. And not to mention, Bloomberg was thrown in there as a foil, basically to siphon off some support from Biden as well. From Bernie as well. So the fact that no concessions were made, Jackie, let's start there.
No concessions were made from Joe Biden today. I think yesterday Biden offered it wasn't even an olive branch. It wasn't even the stick that the olive is on. It wasn't a crushed olive. It was nothing. That to lower the enrollment age for Medicare, I think from 65 to 60. I just, and there was nothing that Biden said today that indicated that he is going to adopt any of Sanders' ideas in any significant way. So no, y'all, you don't get Medicare for all. No, you don't get the cancellation of student loan debt. You ain't getting free college. You ain't getting affordable housing reform. You ain't getting real criminal justice reform. You ain't getting those things out of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party never wanted to do those things. That's why they conspired, the entire establishment, all of them. It was Barack Obama. It was the Clinton wing of the party. It was the Democratic Party bosses. It was Tom Perez. It was all of them. It was the other candidates. It was all of them. And the media conspired against Bernie Sanders. And as I have said before on other platforms, and folks were mad, but oh well, Sanders didn't help himself by not listening to his Black campaign staffers on how to campaign in the South. But it's also true that the media gave Joe Biden 72 hours of amazing free positive press after he won the South Carolina primary. So yeah, the entire Democratic establishment conspired. And I'm not going to say now against Bernie Sanders, because if this was supposed to be not me, us, okay, then the entire Democratic establishment conspired against y'all. Take Bernie Sanders out of the equation. They conspired against y'all. And now they're telling you, Bernie supporters, that you have to support the guy that they conspired against y'all to move your candidate out of the way for. Unity, right? Okay, fall for that. Go ahead. Anyway,
Steve Horn, how come Bernie Sanders wasn't willing to proverbially smack Joe Biden in the teeth?
Well, it's one of the two theories. It's one, he never had the intention to really run to win, which was the Jacqueline theory, or he doesn't have it in him to run to win. He doesn't have it in him to go for that jugular, as you said. He didn't do it in 2016. He didn't do it in 2020, not just against Biden, but pretty much not against any of his opponents except for maybe Bloomberg. But Bloomberg was such a cartoonish villain in the scheme of things that he was like the punching bag for everyone. And even on that, Elizabeth Warren was really the first one to go hard on Bloomberg. And I just want to go back to your point about Obama in this and the Obama machinery and say two things. One, He was there working behind the scenes, as the Politico story that came out said. The headline was pretty stark. It said, Barack Obama is the victor of the 2020 primary. That is, that he was kind of working the phones behind the scenes. He didn't like overthrow the thing, but he didn't even go so far as have to make threats or anything, but he kind of suggested certain things. And Bernie was in touch with Obama. I found that to be one of the biggest parts of the story. So it wasn't like they were going toe to toe. Sort of, if you want to go back to an earlier day for the single payer versus public option versus Obamacare debate, one of the last holdouts was Dennis Kucinich, to go back to a older guard progressive member of the Democratic Party. And he actually had to be threatened to stop what he was doing, which was not vote on Obamacare because he supported single payer. He had to be flown on Air Force One and basically threatened by Obama. It's not clear that even for Sanders it had to go that far. It was more of sounds like a friendly relationship between the two. And it just seems like that's Bernie's personality. He's not going to, he has like this public persona. He's going to fight really hard. He's a sort of the political revolution. But when it comes time to really play hardball, I don't think that he really has it in him. And then for the last thing I just want to say about Obama, and the last thing about that Politico article that came out this weekend, is that there's this assumption that Obama is this magical kind of mythical figure that he's going to ride in. It's going to make people really excited for whoever the candidate is, based on the excitement that was centered around him, mostly in 2008 in that campaign. But if you look at 2016, it didn't work with Hillary, who was a flawed candidate. And it's not clear that just because Barack Obama is sort of going out and campaigning for Biden in 2020, that it will work this time around. So I guess it's also kind of, it will be a somewhat of like a check mark. I don't know what the word would be, but like how popular is Obama still with millennials and younger people? I think that it didn't work necessarily in 2016. We'll see in 2020, because that's really the big part of the voting block that Biden will have to try to excite if he's going to win this time around.
Yeah, so the left being sabotaged in a democracy is not exclusively an American thing. In fact, there's a scandal brewing across the pond in the UK about the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn being undermined from within. Steve Hudson, what's happening with that?
So a huge, big dossier has been leaked. And like many of these things, it's like after the Iraq War, much too late, we found out, oh my God, it was all lies. And we kind of all knew all the time it was lies. What we found out now is that Labour Party staff who are employed within Labour headquarters and are meant to be, of course, factually neutral, they're just helping the party, that they were absolutely horrified that Corbyn won the Democratic leadership election and then won again when he was challenged, and did everything they could to expel as many potential Labour members who wanted to join as possible, even for stuff like tweeting support of the Greens in previous years, or someone just for saying, I fucking love the Foo Fighters. Am I allowed to say that? I'm quoting. It was suspended from the party on that basis. But much more damagingly, we've had all this stuff with anti-Semitism in Labour, and there was one specific unit within the Labour Party, which is called the Governance and Legal Unit, and they were running the party's disciplinary proceedings not to actually deal with genuine issues, like, for instance, anti-Semitism, which is a serious issue, but not to deal with, but rather for factional advantage. So these guys were actively taking anti-Semitism cases and sitting on them, suppressing them, not dealing with them. I saw this with my own eyes, even like with people like Holocaust deniers, and leaving them, telling Jeremy Corbyn, we're dealing with it, and then going to the press behind his back and saying, Corbyn's not dealing with anti-Semitism, he doesn't want us to deal with anti-Semitism. So it was a really vicious and malignant smear campaign, actively done, and deeply anti-Semitic, if I may say so, because rather than dealing with genuine anti-Semitism, they thought this was just a political football that they could exploit for their factional advantage.
Oh, yes. Racism is a political football here as well, as we see Donald Trump running very well with that racism ball. So how is this being received, Steve Hudson? Like, are people pissed about this, or is this just a trickle in the waterfall that is the cascade of the news cycle these days, that people are too preoccupied with other things to really pay it full attention?
Well, it's weird because in the past, obviously, every time that Labour anti-Semitism has come up, the BBC has exploded, the Guardian, the left-wing liberal press has exploded with all these outrageous accusations. Something must be done. But now suddenly it's tumbleweed, nothing, nothing at all. My Twitter feed of, people who are activists within Labour, people are deeply, deeply pissed off. And this report was put together in the last days of the Corbyn leadership. He's not the leader anymore. And now it looks like this thing won't even be submitted officially. That we have a body in the UK called the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and a complaint has been made that Labour was institutionally anti-Semitic. That was by these right-wing people saying that Corbyn had deliberately interfered to stop anti-Semitism cases being prosecuted, when it turns out it was the opposite. And this report was actually put together as part of this submission because institutionally anti-Semitic, that's a label that would be, it's against everything the Labour Party stands for. But unfortunately, now it looks like Labour lobby. Oh, sorry, I froze.
You are unfrozen, my dear.
I'm unfrozen. So now this report is apparently Labour lawyers say they are not going to submit it, even though it proves the guys who are doing this were utterly bad faith actors. And we have verbatim emails and WhatsApps. They're all in this report. And they're saying, oh, well, it was compiled by the left and Labour Party. But the evidence is black and white. But it's not going to be submitted to this independent body, which will judge on whether Labour was institutionally anti-Semitic.
Why does this have echoes of the Podesta emails from the WikiLeaks dump of 4 or so years ago, Steve Horn?
Well, yeah, I guess I think that's like the suspicion of almost anyone now when stuff like this leaks is like, who did it come from and why, and what are the political sort of the political motivations behind it. And I guess my question for Steve, I just like to talk, I didn't want to kind of turn it back to him for a second. Like, what is the legacy right now of Corbyn, sort of like within, like from the left point of view, like the impact he had on Labour within Britain and the party and stuff, like now that he's not the leader anymore? So what are you thinking about that? Obviously this is a way, like maybe there are forces working against him the whole time, but I guess kind of a retrospective, how do you think that he did?
Well, we kind of knew this was happening all the time. Yeah, and it was all over Twitter in the Labour left bubble, people being suspended for just having liked something that Green said. That is not reason to suspend someone from the Labour Party. We've now found out it was much more vicious than we thought. And we certainly found out that Corbyn, and maybe there's a parallel here with Bernie, was essentially much too nice to these people. He was always prepared to give people the benefit of the doubt. He didn't want to, go down to low down dirty politics, and they screwed him, and they completely screwed him. The legacy of Corbyn, on the one hand, he shifted the political debate massively. You could argue that the current Conservative government is enacting a bunch of socialist policies, especially under the corona crisis. The debate about neoliberalism and austerity is ended. We have to spend money right now to stop people dying and to look after our people. They are not doing it properly, but that debate has been won, that cuts are bad. That's clear. Socialism is more popular as a term in the UK than capitalism. So in that sense, we won. In terms of institutionally changing the Labour Party, Corbyn's impact was extremely weak, if at all anything. What we failed to achieve was a democratic reorganization of the party so that local members can actually just choose who are their candidates. We don't have an open primary system so that you can vote for your candidate. You have to essentially mount a very complicated vote to allow a vote to take place, and it barely ever happens. And so there, Corbyn lost his nerve and failed to push through a democratic system, and that was tragic.
Guys, it seems as if, though, British Bernie Sanders has been undermined and American Jeremy Corbyn have been undermined.
This is how neoliberalism protects
from within.
Go
ahead, Jack.
Maybe we shouldn't have been expecting the press to be fair. And we know they're against us. Let's be honest about it. And most of all, I think we need to understand the structures of power. We weren't just political opponents. We were threatening these guys' jobs. The fact that there is out there, grassroots socialist movement is an inherent danger to their jobs, and they will do anything and they will stop at nothing. And I don't think people really took this on board, because it's not a political argument. It's how they pay their mortgage. It's really that grim. And that's why they will stop at nothing. And unless you try and kind of look at it in that social and economic perspective, and
Oh, I think you froze again.
I knew. I was just waiting for him to unfreeze before I said something. Okay, Steve Hudson, he's in suspended animation for just a couple of moments, gang. But listen, I want us to move on in the conversation because our own Mark Steiner had the opportunity to sit down with Noam Chomsky, and we know that we're going to be viewing this period in our history as pre-COVID and post-COVID. But Noam Chomsky, obviously brilliant mind, astute observations on a myriad of things. He has a new book. It's called Internationalism or Extinction. Let's have a listen from that interview.
Fascism was an ideology. It wasn't just screaming and ranting at adoring crowds. It was an ideology of state takeover and domination and control of everything. Of course, labor unions and so on, but also business. State control of business, Gleichschaltung it was called. That's almost the opposite of what we have now. We have business control of the state under Trump deepening.
If you want to see more of that interview or watch it in its entirety, go to our website, therealnews.com, or to our YouTube channel. Special thanks to Mark Steiner for that fantastic interview with Noam Chomsky. Jackie, Brother Noam be on his gnome. Gnome be gnoming, dog. Expand, if you can, about the point that he made about how the business fascist state is expanding under Trump.
Well, when you look at the way the corporatocracy has existed before Trump, and this is an argument that we keep having on the left, because people are saying, Trump is the worst that we've ever seen. Well, the corporate class has had control of politics since before Trump came into office. The only thing Trump has done was to make their control less polite. Really, that's really what he's done. And it's more overt. They don't have to be nice about the control they have in our politics now. So now what we have, instead of politicians presenting the veneer of doing something the people want and controlling, or keeping the corporations at bay, where Hillary Clinton would say at one point, well, I went into the bankers and I told them, you guys cut that out. Well, Trump is not going to do that, because he's just going to come right out and say, no, we're going to open the economy back up so that corporations can start making money again. And if some people die, hey, then there're just going to be some deaths. But that's what capitalism has always been in this country. So from my perspective, and this is where I disagree with Brother Chomsky a little bit, and I think a lot of leftist and socialists will take this track, that, yeah, it looks like things are worse under Donald Trump, but neoliberalism and the corporate class were killing poor and working class and indigenous and Black folk long before now. The virus coming along and Trump's absolute refusal to respond to meeting the needs of the people and focusing on the corporate class in this moment just makes it look like things were worse. But the way the gaps in the system existed before Trump became president. It's just more crucial that we're feeling those gaps in this system now under him. But this is something we've been talking about for decades. And this is what neoliberalism does. Neoliberalism kills.
Steve Horn.
Well, the one thing about that I liked what Chomsky said just in that clip, it sort of elucidates what I saw when Trump was elected, and it kind of just expanded on what Jacqueline was just saying. is before what we had, we'll just say under Obama or under Clinton or probably under George W. Bush, you had people who were de facto, we'll just say puppets, people who were doing the service of ExxonMobil, of JP Morgan Chase Bank, of Big Pharma, of name your industry. What was amazing to me when Trump assumed the White House during his transition period and the people that he named to his cabinet was the fact that he was naming not the puppets necessarily, but the puppeteers to be in his cabinet. People like Betsy DeVos, who for decades had funded the charter school movement. People like Rex Tillerson, the longtime CEO of ExxonMobil. So he's made more clear and more blunt in your face what has been going on for a long time. And in that way, yeah, I think that it just to go back to what Chomsky was saying, this is the corporate or the multinational sort of capture of the state. It's the state acting as the servant for them. So I think that it's a healthy debate to be had, but it may not be the same classical sort of fascism that some point to for Trump. I think it's an extension of what we've seen for decades now in the neoliberal era under the United States and around the world. But the United States has been the global guarantor of that political system, if you will. And I think what we're dealing with now in this era is, will that system continue? Will it grow? Or will we see something else? What will come out of the coronavirus? Because right now we are seeing a crisis of that system in a way that we have never seen a crisis of it before. 2008 was a minor version of that compared to what we're seeing now, and maybe the level of unemployment and the political and economic crisis that will exist for months, if not years, to come under it. So I think what will be interesting debate to be had is this the end of the neoliberal era, and are we turning to something else, or will something even worse come out of this moment now?
Steve Hudson, Noam Chomsky's book is titled Internationalism or Extinction. That almost sounds like something a Brexiter, a position a Brexiter would take. You know, it's important to remain within our borders, within our own nationalist borders, because when you hop out there in the globalism part of it, you open yourself up to things like what we are experiencing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we're definitely experiencing, there's a fracture within capital. You know, there are some big sort of media capital interests or some financial capital interests who are very sort of liberal in that whole sense, neoliberal, you know, would very much like to vote for Hillary Clinton style Democrats or Tony Blair style Labour Party. And on the other hand, we have, you know, much more it's a tendency to nationalist authoritarianism, which Trump is, you know, clearly pushing here. And we see that with right-wing parties throughout the world. So the British Tory Party, the British Conservatives, but you've got, you know, Erdogan and Netanyahu and Narendra Modi and all these people in so many different countries who are going this way. And I think the classical sort of liberal, so the right-wing liberal trick of, we'll be a bit socially liberal, but actually we're going to shaft you economically, is now going to something very different. And we're certainly seeing, you know, a clear move away from globalization that's been going on for 10 years now. And there is a battle within capital. It's not just one big sort of mass of people who get together and conspire together. You know, there are different interests in there. And clearly there are a lot of capital interests who don't like Donald Trump. I think they don't like it because it makes the establishment look ridiculous, and it actually reveals this in that sense.
Absolutely.
The question is really, you know, where do we apply pressure? Am I still on?
You are, dear. I'm sorry.
I'm freezing.
For like
I'm
2
freezing.
seconds.
I'm sorry.
I'm too quick on the draw to try to jump in. But no, finish your point. Finish your point. Go ahead.
His question is, where do we apply pressure? And at the moment, the most powerful thing we have left, the biggest weapon in the armory, is the state. If you can capture government, then clearly there's a whole lot of stuff you can do. The trouble is, obviously, the state's powers today are much, much weaker than they have been in the past, like compared to World War II or whatever. The state, you know, with all the sort of corporate power that's been evolved, the state has actually, you know, very little it can do. And actually, you know, money can be, and if you're not the US and don't have the dollar as the international reserve currency, you know, money can be withdrawn extremely fast. If Britain had voted for a socialist government, the markets would have attacked the next day, the pound would have collapsed, and all of these things. So, you know, the power of the state is today actually very, very limited. But how do we create a globalist socialist power or an international socialist power, which is beyond the state. And that's something that we really haven't come up with yet, and we need to work at very hard.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that the makers of the guillotines get their cut of the stimulus, because I think that is a way. You guys know I'm kidding, or am I kidding? That could be a way, to bring the world order into its proper way of being. But gang, I'm sorry, we got to move on to the next topic, because here's something interesting that was in Vox recently, where a recent study shows that 1 in 3 Americans have conspiracy theories regarding the origins of the coronavirus. Jacqueline Luqman, what was your take?
It's hard for me as a Black woman not to have some sympathy with people who believe in conspiracy theories, right? Because it's not as if this government has not done some truly, truly horrible things to our people, to Native people, to crushing labor unions and workers' movements and women's movements. So, everything that is looked at as a conspiracy theory isn't like some, wackadoodle, crazy tinfoil hat, Alex Jones kind of stuff. But this one is. I do kind of think that this one is. Listen, I agree with Dr. Ron Daniels when I talked to him last week, and he said the idea that, any government would tank their own economy to create something biological, viral, whatever, to get rid of a segment of the population is pretty ridiculous, because they could do that pretty expeditiously with a lot less money. So that's not within the realm of reasonableness, I don't believe. But again, I think that we are living in the collapse of the American society as we know it. And especially in social media, people are being exposed to a lot of information that they never thought they would see about the things that the government they used to trust did. I mean, the Afghanistan papers were just released right before the pandemic hit, a few months before. WikiLeaks, the Podesta emails, and the Pentagon papers, and people are finding out the truth about the Tonkin Bay and the Bay of Pigs invasion, and so it does make people paranoid. The truth coming out does make people paranoid about what this government is capable of doing. And it's hard to discern what's true and what's not. This one was a little out there for me, and just as out there as 5G spreading coronavirus.
I hate those people. Oh my God. Please.
I mean, all I can do is laugh, but I want to I don't want to write people off as just wacky because they believe this, because I think part of the reason people believe this is because our government has done some horrible things. I do think we have to be careful that we don't go too far out there, because then we can miss the forest for the trees kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's where the whole misinformation and everything comes into play, because Jackie, you raised an excellent point. In the 1980s and 90s, when crack cocaine was ravaging the Black communities across this country, Black people were saying then that the CIA is bringing in cocaine to our communities. And when it would get repeated outside of our communities, it would be quickly poo-pooed, like, no, the government would never. The government, yes, they would absolutely do that. They did do that. It has been proven. But Steve Horn, there's a lot of anti-Asian sentiment around the coronavirus, where Asian people are being attacked, they are being spat upon. There was an acid attack against an Asian person here in the U.S. recently, and Donald Trump has fueled the majority of this. I'm talking to my neighbors who are Chinese immigrants, and it was heartbreaking for her to tell me. She said, she cannot understand why people are so upset with the Chinese. And she said it out of her mouth that that's coming from the top down. So the theories, wacky as they may be, there are some racist undertones and overtones to them as well.
I think that yes, and there's also an ugly element that's playing out between both governments, so the Chinese government and the American government, and on the politics of how that they're portraying the virus and the culprit of the virus. Actually, both governments now at high levels are at least suggesting or hinting that elite officials at opposite, China looking at the U.S., the U.S. looking at China, were the ones who kind of cultivated this virus and may have literally started a biological war against the entire world. And that's sort of like the seeds of these ideas, in some ways comes from Trump and the Republican Party, officials calling it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus. But, even within China, there's stories that show that, like today, the Washington Post reported that there is some racism within that society towards African people, actually, that they may be bringing in the virus. So there's lots of racism to go around and lots of ugliness to go around in this virus. Lots of stuff that we may not have seen it as well before. It may have been latent or hidden. That's really coming to the surface due to the virus. And I just want to say one quick thing about this Vox article and the premise of what people believe. It sounds like what people believe is that it started in a laboratory in China, which was close to where this market was in Wuhan. And in actuality, that started from a scientific paper. It was a thesis that a scientist in China put out there. I think that paper ended up getting censored, but you can still find it, at least here in the United States. And to me, I guess I'll say that I don't want to say I completely buy what his paper was saying, but he was putting it out there as a theory to be studied more. There is a lab that studies this stuff closely. He was not saying they did it on purpose, but he said that maybe by accident this stuff had spread. And I think because there is still no definitive answer on how this thing spread the way it is, I think it's pretty clear it's probably from the market, or at least in part from the market. I don't think that we should completely close our minds to the fact that maybe there was a laboratory accident that happened to be pretty close to there, because we know it's in the same sort of vicinity. But yeah, I mean, of course, I think that some of the conspiracy theories become more far-fetched when we're talking about was this intentional biological warfare waged by either the United States or China, depending on which country you're talking about, how it's being discussed among people. That's far-fetched to me. By far.
Hudson, what is the conversation like around this in Europe, or is there even a conversation? Because at this point, does it even matter where the virus started?
Well, and of course not. The main thing is to save lives and to look after people. And I think we should really reflect on how positive it is that so many people really put that first. The huge majority of people, we've been told all our lives that markets come first. No, they don't. People come first. At the same time, I think that this mistrust of truth and, fake news, we have to kind of ask ourselves, where does this come from socially? And if you live in a system where it seems like both sides lie, so in my lifetime, probably the Iraq War was the biggest thing, but there's all these other examples. Obviously, governments lie all the time, and it's really important that as socialists we hang on to the idea that the truth is out there. It is really important to keep an open mind, to investigate, to find out the truth. And it's not just something like, well, I'll take whatever fact fits my argument, to make my political point, because you see so many people online these days who are just about, I support this, so I'm just going to say this to support it. And we really have to insist that people really push for the truth, because in the end, when history finally sort of pulls back the curtains and we get all the archived material, every single time, my God, the left was right. The left was right. This was, an imperialist invasion or whatever it was. And we find out every time. And it's really important that we hang on to that and believe in truth. And that's where the damage that the third way and the sort of the liberal centrists have done is so massive. And they complain about the fake news of Donald Trump. These guys lied and lied again to launch an invasion which killed so many people and promoted so much suffering and terrorism in the Middle East.
Well, Steve Hudson, we know that the UK and really the whole of Europe, specifically in Italy and Spain at this point, are dealing with the terrible effects of the pandemic, killing thousands of people. And I wanted to ask you, in the country in which you were from and where you reside, how are prisoners being handled during this pandemic? Are people being let out of jail, or are people in jail and being subjected to conditions that could cause them to become infected?
I'm sorry, my understanding is that the conditions are being loosened, and certainly a lot of people are being given parole who might not have it, but I am not up to date. That the prison industrial complex is obviously not such a big thing as in the United States, where it's obviously so huge. The amount of prisons we have is so much smaller. It's much less of a political issue. And things that really matter are things like, the personal protective equipment for medical personnel. That sort of thing is the really, really big issue here at the moment, because in both Germany and the UK, there's not enough for the people who are putting their lives on the line to save us.
Mm. Well, here in the U.S., there is a pandemic happening behind bars with inmates dying, people who have been imprisoned either on technicalities. For example, there was an incarcerated person at Rikers Island in New York City who was just there on a parole violation. He hadn't actually committed any crime, and he succumbed to this disease, to this virus rather, behind bars. And Steve, there's something happening with a for-profit immigration detention center in San Diego. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, this is the main immigration detention center in this area of the United States. It's on the border area in San Diego, and it is for profit in that it's owned by the company Core Civic, which formerly went by the name Corrections Corporation of America. They changed their name to something more nebulous, so no one would know what the hell it is. But yes, within this facility, what they did was they had an English language contract in which everyone who was detained in the facility had to sign a statement basically saying that Core Civic would not be held civilly liable if their PPE or their mask, the personal protective equipment, if the mask that they gave the people who are incarcerated, if they were not protected by that and they got sick from the coronavirus, they would not be held liable in court, basically. And of course, the big issue is that it's problematic in of itself. It's problematic even more in that many of the people who are being incarcerated in these facilities, these for-profit facilities, do not even speak English. So they're signing away their civil rights, basically, or being forced to sign contracts that they do not even understand. They're not being advised by attorneys. And basically that means that if they get sick and die, their families have no legal recourse in the court of law to do anything about it. So that's what's happening and I think Core Civic is the biggest for-profit prison company in America. It's one of the big 2 or 3 for sure. And obviously it's a huge one here in San Diego, but all across the border, I think they are the biggest locker up people, the incarcerators of immigrants in the United States, and jails and the whole system they're involved in.
Well, we have a clip from someone who is incarcerated at this facility. Let's hear from that person.
There's, like I said, guys on the floors. Since I've been here, there's been guys on the floors soiling themselves, and we have to clean that up. They won't come in and do it. Medical won't. They don't care. They don't seem to take them down to MOB, which is a medical observation floor, and they won't do that for some reason. They do sometimes. They took a few guys out of here. That's why there's less. To MOB is where they said they were going, which was a medical observation. Inmate patients with wounds who soil themselves are left to be taken care of by us. I mean, it's pretty bad at times.
Jackie, this is something that I've been thinking about recently because, for one, we've known now for weeks and months about coronavirus. At least we know some information about how it's spread, how contagious it is, what personal actions can be taken in order to try to minimize your risk of infection. But people who are incarcerated in this country are given a bar of soap for a month. They are not able to social distance. And I wonder, could they or even their families, should these people who are locked up contract coronavirus, get sick and die, could there be some legal recourse for their families? Because this is a lot like reckless endangerment. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. Let me not throw around legal terms like I'm Jack McCoy. But this looks like a lawsuit to me of possibly epic proportions.
You know, in a reasonable world, I'm not even going to say in a perfect world because we're far from that, but in a reasonable world, you would think that we could rely on some legal recourse were such things to happen, and they have happened already. I mean, at Rikers Island alone, where a lot of people in Rikers Island are just waiting for trial. They haven't even been convicted of a crime yet. They literally didn't have money to post bail, so they're sitting there for weeks, months, years, waiting to go to trial. There's one bar of soap for 40 inmates, and that's already the conditions at Rikers Island. So, I mean, the possibility of massive infections and an unconscionable number of deaths among the incarcerated population in this country, both domestic and the detainees, the immigrant detainees, it's already happening. But I don't see any legal recourse coming to fruition from any of those cases, because how successful have we been in this country in holding the prison industrial system accountable and the criminal justice system accountable for violating the rights and the lives of people who die in custody and who have been dying in custody under suspicious circumstances before coronavirus hit. It rarely happens. So this is just another one of those cases where this virus is ripping the veneer off of any semblance of civilization that this system, that this society, and this so-called great country really has had. We're not a civilized country. The United States is not a civilized country. We haven't been, ever.
Steve Hudson, I mean, again, you have a different perspective of this, looking at America from the outside. I mean, I know these stories are undoubtedly being circulated globally. I mean, what is your reaction to the fact that people are, in effect, being left to possibly die when there are many ways, not so much to prevent it, but you could release elderly prisoners, you could release people who are sick. It just seems as if there is going to be, as Jackie mentioned, a massive loss of life for no other reason than the governors just didn't feel like letting people out of jail. What is your take on that?
Well, I hardly want to comment on America, but maybe this is just really common knowledge. I only recently read that there are now more black males in prison in the United States than there were slaves at the end of slavery. You know, the system, in a sense, has changed its legal form, but the utter contempt for human life and human potential, and the kind of things that people end up being prosecuted, and the deeply racialized basis of that is just simply appalling. It has to change. I can't really say anything more than that. Just all solidarity to everyone. A better world is possible, and we have to find better ways of treating people and leaving people to die like that. To me, that conjures up the slave ships that brought people over from Africa.
Can I tell you, I thank you so much for recognizing the anti-blackness in what we are seeing. Snap, 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 snap to Steve Hudson.
Hey, well, the British were kind of really involved in all of that slave trade. So, it's the least we can do to acknowledge our role in our capitalists enriched themselves massively with, the plantations in the West Indies and in the Americas as well. So, it's really important that we educate people about this as much as we possibly can.
Can I jump in for a second? I really appreciate what you said, Steve, at the end when you said that a better world is possible, because I think people get in the intentions of radicals and revolutionaries like me wrong when we criticize this country's policies mercilessly, because we can't change these policies if we're not brutally honest about the damage they do. We cannot get to that better world where we create something better. I mean, America is a very young country compared to other countries around the world. This is still a very experimental thing we've got going on. So we can shape this country into whatever the hell we want it to be, but we're not going to be able to do that in order to benefit the masses of people unless we are brutally and painfully honest about the damage that the policies that we've gone along with and have said, okay, that's not so bad. We'll just deal with it. Maybe we'll get to it later on. Maybe somebody else will come along and do better 4 years later. We've got to be brutally honest about why those policies are not working, or else they will continue to kill us. That is just the truth. We can make a better world and a better country, but we're not going to do it by sugarcoating the shit sandwich. We're just not.
Steve Hudson, can I ask you a quick question? As a Brit and as a European, are you there? Are you frozen? Is he frozen in time?
He's frozen again.
Austin
All right,
Powers
well,
at the beginning of the movie.
Yes. All right. I'll ask him when we come back.
My words have a
when he
chilling
comes
effect.
back.
No.
Clearly. Well, Steve, Horn, and Jackie, I want to ask you guys. There was an interesting piece in the Times, New York Times, the failing New York Times, right? About why the whole world's gone to shit, but the stock market is performing, baby. The stock market is rebounding. I don't know what the stock market is at this given moment at 5:56 p.m. on Monday, because I don't give a shit about the stock market. Let me keep it 1,000% with y'all. I'm too poor to have money in the stock market, so I don't give a fuck what the stock market is doing. However, it seems as though Donald Trump's words, his insistence on reopening the economy sooner than the doctors and the medical professionals would prefer, is having a positive effect on Wall Street. Steve Horn, can you fill us in?
Well, it goes be brutally honest, kind of just go after Jacqueline. The reason why I think this is happening is it goes back to the bailout bill, and this goes right back to the beginning of our conversation. So the bailout bill, sometimes known as the CARES Act, that was passed a couple weeks ago on a 96-0 vote in the Senate, and then only by a voice vote in the House. So we don't even know exactly how people voted on that at all, except for in the video that you can actually see. It only sounds like there was one guy who said no, and it probably was a Republican, Thomas Massey, although AOC claims that she voted against it in the aftermath. I didn't hear her voice in the video. That said, this goes back to that bill, in my opinion. That was the biggest wealth transfer and heist in American history. I feel like progressives and the left are still have not quite grappled with what happened a couple weeks ago, in that Wall Street got massively bailed out and that corporate America got massively bailed out. This is the same bill in which normal people got $1,200 checks. But since then, the stock market has pretty much gone nothing but up. While people are losing their jobs, while the unemployment rolls have grown, the stock market has gone up. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound at all like 2008 and the aftermath of that, where Wall Street got a massive bailout and people suffered? We are seeing the exact replica of that, but on steroids. And I think that we will look back on what happened 2 weeks ago for years as a shameful moment in the history of the United States Senate and the history of the Democratic Party that completely went along with it, including Bernie Sanders, including Elizabeth Warren, and including most likely AOC as well, and the squad and all of them. None of them put up a real fight against it. And so I think that this article in the New York Times pretty much encapsulates exactly the dynamics that exist with this ballot bill. And I expect it to become exacerbated even more severely in the weeks and months ahead.
Jacqueline Luqman, clearly capitalism is the antithesis of humanitarianism. And when Steve talks about this bailout looking a lot like the bailout of 08-09, hey, it's a lot of the same jokers in the mix. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham. I mean, these exact same Bamas are all over this as they were 12-ish years ago. So, of course, Wall Street is doing well.
Oh yeah, I mean, not only is this we don't care about you act, just an absolute giveaway to the tourism industry, the hotel industry, corporate, every corporate industry that exists, but also Bernie Sanders dropping out of the Democratic, of the race for the Democratic nomination was also a gift to industry. It was also a gift to the corporations. Why? Well, because now the healthcare industry doesn't have to worry about getting pushed for Medicare for all. Now the student loan financiers don't have to worry about student loan forgiveness. Now the prison industrial complex doesn't really have to worry about giving up their profits in exchange, over actual criminal justice reform, because the Democratic Party isn't going to deliver any of those things. The military industrial complex, Joe Biden and the Democrats are not going to stop bombing the fuck out of people around the world. Ask the Libyan people how they feel about Joe Biden and the Obama presidency. Ask them. Ask the Syrian people how they feel about Biden being the vice president of the bomber-in-chief, Barack Obama. So the corporations that have made billions and trillions of dollars off of the economic oppression of Americans and the physical and the physical oppression of Americans, but also the physical oppression of other people around the world through endless war, they're still going to make their bank. They're still going to make their money because Bernie Sanders is literally no longer a threat to them. So that's what's going on with the stock market. They see that they continue to win.
Steve Hudson, are you back with us?
I think I'm back.
Yay!
Hey, sorry.
What have been the response in the financial markets in Europe to the pandemic and to any type of stimulus? Maybe you could fill us in on what the stimulus looks like in Germany and in the UK.
Well, we're heading for a massive recession, probably bigger than the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that seems, there's a talk about, is it V-shaped, is it U-shaped, or is it L-shaped? So V will go straight back up, U-shape, it will stay down and then go back up, and L-shape is just it goes down and then it stays down. And so by now, the Bank of England is literally doing what Zimbabwe did. It is printing money for the government to spend. It doesn't even go via the kind of what's called quantitative easing, the solution of like the central bank will buy up bonds emitted by the government. It's literally just printing money and giving it to the government to spend. So we're seeing, weirdly, it's kind of, in order to save capitalism, they're resorting to very socialist policies. However, it is always socialism for the rich. And, let's do some capitalism for the rich. If you want government money, hey, let's have democratic control of your industry. If you want our money, taxpayers' money, then we want to own your industry. We want a share of your profits. We want a share of a say on the board. And this is just so obvious. And yet, when it comes to, they love persecuting people on welfare, the poorest people, the few dollars or pounds or euros that they get to stay alive. And when it comes to that, no, everything has to be checked and you have to run through all these hoops to get, a mere pittance to live on. When it comes to these industries, they're literally just throwing money at them left, right, and center. And these are if you like, the lazy parasites, the welfare queens of the top corporations. And we need to go after them and demand a much more capitalist approach. We want, if you take our money, we own you. It's ours now.
That's what I was thinking. For the airline industry here in the U.S., only makes sense that the airline, Boeing, I'm not sure if Boeing has actually made a formal pitch for stimulus money, but I know the airline industry as a whole certainly has. And I mean, are they still going to charge us $35 a bag? These are my questions. So, like,
it's going to be $65 now.
Oh, Jesus. I can't, girl. I can't. Listen, we do have time for one more quick story, guys. We're going to do a non-serious story real quick because, as we know, professional sports are on hiatus in the midst of a pandemic. Can't touch nothing. Can't go sit in an arena of thousands of people sitting next to strangers. That's probably not a good idea. But what the NBA is doing, they have instituted a game of horse. Are we familiar with horse? Everyone familiar with horse?
Mm-hmm.
How horse works?
Yep.
I'm really not the person for this segment.
That's okay. So
we'll teach you.
Yes.
That's great.
Like you go around the perimeter of the basketball court and everyone makes a different shot. And so if you miss, if the first person makes the shot and the second person does not make the shot, then that starts with the H. And if you get it spelled out the horse, well, then you lost. So the NBA players are having a good time, I guess, virtually doing these horse shots. Who do we have here, Dwayne? I don't even know these kids anymore. Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce, he's still in the league? Oh, that's what I thought. All right, WNBA players and former NBA players, you know, yeah, it must be nice to have money. That's what this looks like to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it looks like that none of them, I don't think any of them are in a public park.
Oh, no, chat.
No, they're in their own personal backyard basketball court. Which, okay.
Mike Conley had his own little basketball. Well, I wouldn't say little. It was a full basketball gym at his home. He's a NBA player, but yeah, it was. I mean, I think that there were some pretty funny discussions about the like, are people this desperate to see sports that they like, because the internet quality was pretty terrible and it was kind of cell phone style internet. It was very pixelated, like maybe what you would imagine internet streaming looking like over a decade ago. But and honestly, like, I felt it was still pretty fun to watch regardless of the quality. I mean, it was just you kind of get a glimpse into their lives and sort of hear them answer some questions, at least see a little bit of something. But yeah, the banter about it on Twitter was pretty much almost as fun to read and follow as watching the thing itself. And yeah, the coverage of this horse competition will continue throughout the week. So that was one round of it, but they're doing multiple rounds. And I think it doesn't wrap up until later on this week on ESPN.
I think there should be like a coverage of the kinds of quarantine sports that short, fat, geeky people like me do, like, which is like power reading, Walter Rodney's How They Underdeveloped Africa, or, binge watching all 87 seasons of The Walking Dead. And I don't know.
So this is where I do buy into Americanism in terms of the consuming of sports. Like, I learned sports as a teen girl. Well, let me rephrase. I learned professional sports. I played sports in high school, but I learned how to understand football, basketball, and baseball. Why? Because the boys know how to talk about football, basketball, and baseball. So I learned sports how to pull men, basically. What that was my goal in becoming a sports head. But I will say, I am looking forward to the NBA hopefully resuming their season, and they've already said that it's likely that they will do it in empty arenas. And what I'm hoping for, because the NBA players cuss like sailors, and I'm hoping that on network television, we will hear them calling each other all kinds of effers and sons of bitches, and people are going to be clutching their pearls like, oh my God, the language of basketball players. But I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's going to get real interesting during football season, though. That's going to be very interesting if this continues to, Yeah,
but hey, look, if people are prepared to watch just this kind of shit on Twitter of people, just playing horse, well, let's do it. Let's just save everybody these gazillions of dollars that are spent and give it all to the homeless. And we can do speed reading, How the West Underdeveloped Africa, and we can do a bit of that. It'll be fun,
Yes, we all need
to ways to cook pasta and beans.
We need to de-jockify ourselves and re-intellectualize ourselves, perhaps. But gang, that's our time. We actually went over a little bit, but I want to thank Steve Hudson, Steve Horn, and Jacqueline Luqman, our great panel, for joining us. Fantastic conversation, guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you.
Peace, y'all.
Solidarity.
That's right. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Join us tomorrow for the next episode of Stir Crazy right here on The Real News. Don't forget to like and subscribe us on our YouTube channel. Y'all have a good one.